Inter Alia is a legal term that means amongst other things, and it's an homage to women who basically run their lives amongst other things. I was writing since I was really small, like writing even little novels and books and so on. In fact, someone recently sent me something I wrote when I was in year 2. And I didn't think of it as a career as such because I was at law school and I became a lawyer and I was a human rights practitioner. I realized that I was using my storytelling in my work when I was doing a sentence matter in court or when I was trying to explain what the situation was with a client of mine and why they were significantly different to other clients. So when I was a lawyer, I decided to go back to university and study a master's in theatre and film. And within that program, there was a writing for theatre component, which I just fell in love with, and also a new writing component in terms of studying new plays. And I just absolutely realised that was my form. And so then I went to the National Institute of Dramatic Art, which is NIDA in Australia. And so you actually had the chance to develop and collaborate and learn your skill set and understand how theatre works. So after I finished the course, I worked 3 days a week as a lawyer and 3 days a week as a writer. In a way, having that other job allowed me to be able to pay my bills, but also have 3 days a week of writing. And my first play went to the Sydney Opera House. After that, I started doing more and more work. And at a certain point, I had to choose between law and theatre. I remember at the time thinking, oh, maybe I've left it too late. Like at 33 to start being a playwright is maybe everyone else started at 24 and I won't be able to catch up. I suddenly realised that I had this wealth of experience, but I also had a lot of social experience in terms of understanding class and gender and race, because I did a lot of discrimination work and disability, and also just who's privileged in society and who's not. So working at that very it was almost the ER room of human rights law where I worked. I just really wanted to inform my work with that. And so I just thought we have to really interrogate the fact that women are an add-on to the system and that it hasn't been built with them in mind. It's interesting when you really feel passionate about something and you actually don't know the answer. You only know the question and you're fleshing out the question and the ideas behind the play. That, in a way, the play writes itself. And so really your job is to know that that's there and find the characters and put enough hurdles for them to jump so that you're forced to discover for yourself. And I guess the research also helps. So I did a lot of research. The research I love to do is to talk to people that are actually living those lives. Basically, I like to have one page with sort of a map of what's happening and the journey from A to B. And also I like thinking of it more as like a symphony, or you start with, some music and then you bring the horns in and then you bring in the kind of percussion and then you have this kind of calamity of a moment and then suddenly the flute starts somewhere and you think, oh wow, what's that moment? You use restraint and you use kind of juxtaposition in a manner that actually allows you to tell a story in a way that the audience are not ahead of the story. This story is also about slightly older young people who are on the cusp or have arrived at age independence where they're no longer able to be instructed by their parents. So it's sort of a different scenario, and also they're entitled and have complete legal access to anything they want to have access to. So have you taught them enough before that? And is denying all social media and all internet interaction the answer? It's not about this huge juggernaut of the internet. I mean, it is, but it's also about how community deals with these juggernauts that come at it and how we learn enough that we can actually allow our young people to grow up in a world where they're still connected, where they still have conversations, where there's still an interrogation of what's happening in their lives, that's actually meaningful and recognisable to other people. I think that parents, and I'm probably as guilty as many other parents, is that we haven't been knowledgeable enough and we don't know all that much. We have to decide to learn and to not be fully judgmental about it all, but find a way to have conversations. And so women are not only doing the mothering and caring and the sort of predominant work of that and the hard slog of that, but they're also managing households and keeping everything in order for so many members of a family that is invisible work, and carrying really extraordinary emotional loads of other people's needs and other people's requirements that really is at odds sometimes with having a job where you're expected to show up at certain hours. You know, what happens if someone has to go to the concert at school? So it's the juggle really of being a woman in the workplace who also happens to have a family that they're committed to and want to be part of. But at a certain point, a young teenage boy steps into a zone that their mother really doesn't have access to. You don't understand it, and you don't understand what peer groups are when it comes to boys. It's a different conversation. And fathers kind of understand it, but they've also had an experience of maybe some toxic masculinity, or certainly some things they haven't felt comfortable about, or where they haven't been treated well and they feel a bit embarrassed about it. So it's about how we provide language around that so that there's some difficult conversations and some really strong mentoring that takes guts from men to provide to young boys. It was really interesting. I interviewed 10 women judges for this play, to do the research for this play, and every one of them afterwards said they hung up of the Zoom that I did, or they finished the interview and went home, and every one of them texted me and said, "My husband's currently walking my teenage son around the block having a difficult conversation." I think it's always difficult in rehearsals when you have all of these people sitting around a table. You know, there's so many people in that first couple of weeks of rehearsal, and the thing on the table is the script, and that's all there is so far. And you know, you think, wow, this is like coming together in a way that you could never have imagined. So that is the magic of theatre for me. And then the next element is, of course, we bring the audience, and they have their own experience of it, and they interpret it within the confines and context of their own lives. And theatre is all about process, you know, like it doesn't just arrive fully formed and then go onto the stage. It is about development periods throughout, where you put a version of the script in front of some actors with a director and a designer, and you come up with ideas that spark other ideas, and we go away and come back with another draft. And, you know, it is magic being made. And I think the National Theatre understand what is at the basis of theatre. The actual heart of the stories that are about characters struggling and trying to understand something is actually universal. So, you know, it's from the specific to the universal. And if people can hear a story that is started in a whole other culture, but it speaks to them, I think that's really one of those great things that theatre can do. I just realised that if you tell a story with detail and enough kind of compassion and, I guess, complexity of a story, but also just the simple humanity of a story, you can create like the magical thing that everyone wants to create in an audience, in a judge, in whoever is actually receiving the story, which is empathy with the characters that you're speaking about. Whether it's a true story or whether it's a fictional story, either way, if you can actually allow the receiver of the story in and to feel compassion for that character or that person, they then start to think differently about that person and the situation that they're in. And I believe personally that storytelling is the way of making change, because we all can actually feel empathy for someone if we are targeted in the right way, or if we're told their story in a way that actually affects us and makes us see the unfairness of their own situation or the significant issues they've had in life that have led them to where they are.